This is the introductory training module for the GRAND clinical trial. It's module 1 in our series. Over the next few minutes, our goal is to give you a high-level roadmap of all the material we're going to cover in this training series. First, let's quickly go over why this clinical trial is so important. Many of you might remember the neurocontrol freehand neuroprosthesis that was developed at Case Western Reserve University and studied in the 1980s and 90s. It was eventually FDA approved in 1997 and was sold in the US, Australia, and Europe. This system made a huge impact on the lives of hundreds of people with cervical level spinal cord injury, restoring their functional hand grasp and giving them the ability to do activities of daily living with more independence. Unfortunately, the company went out of business in 2001, so that system is no longer on the market. But if you stop and think about it, the neurocontrol freehand was commercially available for about 5 years, but it's been off the market for more than 20. With the GRAND clinical trial, we hope to bring a next-generation neuroprosthesis through a pivotal clinical trial and on to FDA approval so that people with cervical level spinal cord injury once again have options when it comes to hand function. The training modules are structured to cover all the activities your site will need to perform during the course of the clinical trial, but it's important to note that in the early stages of the study, some activities may be done by the Cleveland team or by the sites in consultation with the Cleveland team. We've made a note of these sections in this overview. We also know that different members of the team play different roles in the clinical trial. For each module, we've identified the team members who need to go through that training for the site to be certified. A few of the training modules require an evaluation of essential competencies for the team members involved. We'll point those out as we go through this overview. If it's been a while since you've reviewed the basics of neuroprosthetics, or if you're new to the field, the first 3 training modules are designed to step you through the fundamentals of neuroprosthetics as a refresher. Module 2 is an introduction to how functional electrical stimulation works, including how electrical stimulation is used to activate neural pathways, different techniques of activation, and a review of the literature on the safe stimulation levels for FES. There are decades of experience with using electrical stimulation in the body, so this module will present a quick overview of the key findings from fundamental animal and human studies. Module 3 reviews the literature on expected outcomes for an FES hand system, drawing from the experience of the neurocontrol freehand and other early systems. This training module includes videos showing how people actually use the system for functional tasks. We'll also review the kind of data the FDA has previously required for approval, which will be a bit of a preview of a later module where we discuss the outcome measures for this study. Module 4 will give an overview of the technology itself, the network neuroprosthesis. this system really advances the capabilities for FES systems. It's actually a network of separate stimulators that can be placed anywhere in the body, so it can be configured in different ways for different functions. Its unique design was a conscious attempt to address some of the limitations of the neurocontrol freehand system. So, for example, the whole system is now completely implantable. You'll learn how the NMP's modular design will eventually make it possible to restore multiple functions in the same individual, like hand grasp, trunk stability, and eventually bladder control. So these first 3 training modules are a quick introduction on the fundamentals of neuroprosthetics, and they form a good foundation for the modules that follow. The next set of training modules are focused on the GRAND clinical trial itself, starting with a high-level overview and then going into more detail. Module 5 gives a high-level overview of the clinical trial, its goals, trial design, schedule of visits, and study hypothesis. The study is designed to generate all the clinical evidence that the FDA will need to evaluate the system's safety and effectiveness. Many of the features of the clinical trial have already been worked out with the FDA in preliminary discussions, including the choice of outcome measures, the study hypothesis, the follow-up schedule, and the final sample size, which is expected to be 30 participants. Module 6 begins to go a little deeper on recruitment and the study inclusion and exclusion criteria. One of the things that's unique about this study is that it will characterize how much additional function people can get with a neuroprosthesis after they've already had reconstructive surgeries of the upper extremity, such as tendon transfers and nerve transfers. This makes recruitment and screening a little different from other studies, because people who have had reconstructive surgeries need to be neurologically stable before being eligible for the implant. But it also means that candidates who don't need or don't want reconstructive surgery, or who are already neurologically stable, can be screened directly for their eligibility for the study. This training module will go into a lot more detail on the process for recruitment and screening, as well as the process for obtaining informed consent. Module 7 is a deep dive on one of the most important parts of the screening process, the stimulated manual muscle test to evaluate lower motor neuron status. Knowing which paralyzed muscles can be stimulated and which ones are denervated is critical to the eligibility requirements for the study, and this evaluation will also determine which muscles are good candidates for electrode implantation. We'll review how to set up and use the surface stimulator, which muscles of the upper limb should be evaluated, and how to fill out the data collection form. Because of the criticality of this step, this training module will include an evaluation of basic competencies. The first part of Module 8 reviews the outcome measures that we'll use to characterize effectiveness of the NNP. This includes the primary outcome measure, the grasp release test, as well as the secondary measures which include the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, the ADL Abilities Test, and the SCIM-3 Self-Care subcategory. Exploratory measures, including a satisfaction survey and data logging from the implant itself, are also discussed. The schedule of evaluations and the case report forms will also be reviewed. The second part of Module 8 is a deep dive on how to correctly perform the grasp release test. The primary outcome measure for this study is the grasp release test performed at the 3-month visit. It will be given with the NNP on and off. The GRT is also obtained at baseline and throughout the study to document functional changes as well as longitudinal stability of the system over time. Correctly performing this test is critical to the data integrity of the study. This module will explain the test setup, instructions to participants, and how to perform, score, and document the GRT, as well as review common errors and best practices. As with the lower motor neuron evaluation, because of the criticality of the GRT, this training module involves an evaluation of basic competencies. Module 9 reviews the procedures for adverse event reporting, which is how safety will be characterized for the GRAND study. The safety profile for the system will include an analysis of the surgical complications, as well as adverse events reported throughout the study. The safety profile will be characterized at 3, 6, and 12 months. In the training, we'll go over the definitions for adverse event severity, relatedness, and expectedness. Site IRBs, our Data Safety Monitoring Committee, and the FDA review these reports regularly, and this training module will go into detail on those reporting requirements. It's important to see the scope of the study from the perspective of the study participants. In Module 10, we'll discuss the schedule of visits for study participants themselves, including the activities they will do from home, such as exercise and data logging. It's important to note that while study participants will do most of their visits at their home institution, some activities may be done in Cleveland, so this module will discuss those logistics. The Cleveland site features the Zuba Zaretta House, which allows participants and their caregivers to stay in a fully accessible home environment next door to the Cleveland research site. As part of this module, we will also describe our study's unique approach to managing participants who may experience medical issues or life issues that prevent full study participation. The training modules discussed so far cover the range of activities that sites are expected to perform independently as part of the GRAND clinical trial. The Cleveland team is always available to answer questions and help sites through these basic activities and procedures. In our advanced training modules, we'll talk about the parts of the clinical trial that will be done either by the Cleveland team or by the sites in consultation with the Cleveland team. Module 11 reviews the process of pre-surgical planning for the implant procedure. This is a critical part of the study in which the candidate's upper limb evaluation and functional goals are reviewed, and decisions are made about which muscles to implant and whether concurrent procedures need to be performed to achieve a good outcome. The surgical team also decides where the stimulating modules will be placed, how many electrodes will be implanted, and the lengths of network cables and electrodes needed. From the pre-surgical planning process, a complete inventory of implanted components is generated, and a step-by-step surgical plan is created for the surgical team to follow in the OR. Pre-surgical planning culminates in a walkthrough of the implant procedure at about 2 to 4 weeks prior to the surgery to finalize any inventory needs and procedures. Sites will be invited to participate in pre-surgical planning sessions for Cleveland participants. For their own participants, sites will work closely with the Cleveland surgical team at this stage so that the overall strategy can be reviewed and the inventory list and step-by-step plan can be finalized by the Cleveland team. Module 12 involves training in the surgical implant procedure itself. A separate surgeon's training sequence is being developed for this purpose. Initially, first surgeries will take place in Cleveland, and site surgeons will be invited to observe. The training sequence will include pre- and post-surgical activities, as well as the shared responsibility for medical management of study participants throughout the trial. Module 13 reviews the process of programming the NNP after surgery. Initially, all programming will be performed by the Cleveland technical team. Study participants will first have their electrodes profiled and system programmed for exercise at week 3. Then they'll return at week 8 for functional grasp pattern programming and to learn how to use the implant system functionally. While site therapists are not required to learn how to program the system, they are involved in functional training and outcome measures. This module gives the site therapists the tools and understanding they'll need to help study participants use the implant system functionally. This module also will review the different accessories used by the study participants, like the smartphone app and the charging unit. In summary, sites can expect to take part in a number of training sessions in order to qualify as a site trial for the GRAND clinical trial. Regular Q&A sessions will be scheduled to make sure site investigators and clinicians feel comfortable with the content. Congratulations on completing Module 1. Coming up next in Module 2, an introduction to functional electrical stimulation.